Hey guys, tonight we journey back thousands of years to the greatest empire the ancient world had ever seen. We're talking about the Persian Empire, a civilization that stretched from India to Greece, where kings claimed to rule by divine right, and the sun never set on their dominion. But behind the golden palaces and legendary tolerance lies a much harsher reality. Today we're asking what would happen if you lived just one day in the Persian Empire. Because let me tell you, the desert heat isn't the only thing that will leave you breathless. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Oh, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. To the Persian Empire, land of impossible distances, divine monarchs and relentless bureaucratic efficiency. Before you even open your eyes, you can feel the vastness pressing down on you like the weight of the sky itself. This isn't just a kingdomish, it's a machine of administration that spans 3 continents and governs more people than have ever been ruled by a single authority in human history. You're lying on a woven mat in a mud brick house, somewhere in the heartland of the empire. Maybe you're in Persepolis, the ceremonial capital where the great king receives tribute from every corner of the known world. Maybe you're in Susa, the administrative hub where armies of scribes record every tax payment and grain shipment. Or perhaps you're in some distant satrap, a provincial outpost where the king's word travels by horseback and takes weeks to arrive. The air is dry and thin, carrying the scent of dust and distant mountains. There's no glass in your windows, just openings covered with woven screens that do little to keep out the pre-dawn chill. The empire stretches from the Indus River to the Aegean Sea, from the steppes of Central Asia to the deserts of Arabia, and somehow you're expected to navigate this world with nothing but your wits and unwavering loyalty to a king you'll never meet. Outside, you can hear the shuffle of feet and the soft murmur of voices. The empire never sleeps. Somewhere royal messengers are galloping along the great roads, carrying sealed orders from the king to governors thousands of miles away. Somewhere tax collectors are tallying the tribute from distant provinces. Somewhere the great king himself might be waking in a palace so magnificent that even its servants eat from golden plates. But you're not the king. You're not even particularly important. You're just another subject in an empire of millions, expected to know your place, pay your taxes, and somehow survive in a world where the wrong word can be treason and the wrong look can be rebellion. As you stumble to your feet, joints aching from sleeping on the hard ground, remember this: you're living in the greatest administrative achievement in human history up to this point. The Persians have figured out how to govern an area larger than the continental United States, using nothing but horses, writing, and an ironclad belief in absolute royal authority. The sun is rising over the empire, just as it has for over 2 centuries. Cyrus the Great built this machine, Darius perfected it, and Xerxes inherited it. Now it runs on momentum and fear, held together by roads you've never seen, laws you barely understand, and the constant knowledge that somewhere the King of Kings is watching. Your day in the Persian Empire is about to begin. Try not to accidentally commit treason before breakfast. The first thing you need to understand about living in the Persian Empire is that you are always being watched. Not by spies necessarily, misses, though they exist too, but by the empire itself. Every road, every courier, every official stamp and seal is part of a vast nervous system that carries information from the furthest provinces back to the king's ear. You step outside your humble dwelling and immediately feel small, not just because of the vastness of the landscape, but because of what that landscape represents. Those distant mountains, they mark the border of a satrap ruled by one of the king's appointed governors. That road stretching toward the horizon, it's part of the Royal Road, a 1,600-mile highway that connects Sardis to Susa and allows the king's messages to travel faster than anything the world has ever seen. The Persian Empire runs on information, while other kingdoms rely on local strongmen and regional warlords who might or might not stay loyal. The Persians have created something unprecedented, a centralized intelligence network that spans 3 continents. Royal couriers can carry a message from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf in just over a week. That's faster than anyone will travel again until the invention of the railroad. But here's the thing about living in this informational web, mens. You're not just connected to the center of power, you're trapped by it. Every transaction is recorded. Every movement is noted. Every tribute payment, every tax assessment, every legal dispute gets written down on clay tablets or papyrus scrolls and filed away in royal archives. You want to travel to the next town. You'll need permission, documentation, and probably a very good reason. Better hope the local satrap approves, because skilled workers are state resources, and the empire doesn't like to waste resources. You want to complain about your tax burden? Go ahead, but remember that your complaint will be recorded. Your name will be noted, and somewhere in Persepolis, a scribe will make a mark next to your name that says potential troublemaker. The Royal Road isn't just a highway, it's a chain. Every relay station, every fresh horse, every courier speeding past your village, carrying sealed orders is a reminder that you are connected to something vast and impersonal, and utterly beyond your control. The king might be thousands of miles away, but his authority travels at the speed of galloping horses, and those horses never stop. Day and night, through heat and cold, snow and sandstorms, the royal messengers ride. Neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. Sound familiar? The Persians invented the concept that would later inspire the motto of the United States Postal Service. But you're not a royal courier. You're not even allowed near the Royal Road without permission. You're just a subject, watching from the sidelines as the empire's circulatory system pumps messages and commands through arteries you'll never be allowed to use. The sun is climbing higher now, and you can feel the heat beginning to build. Time to find some breakfast, pay your respects to the local officials, and begin another day of trying to survive in the most efficiently administered police state these ancient world ever created. You've managed to avoid immediate arrest for loitering near imperial infrastructure, so now it's time for the most important meal of your Persian day, breakfast. And by breakfast I mean whatever you can afford after paying your taxes, tribute, road maintenance fees, provincial administration costs, royal messenger service charges, and ceremonial gift obligations to the local satrap. Let's set realistic expectations about Persian cuisine for the common folk. You're not dining on the exotic delicacies that reach the royal table. No peacocks stuffed with pearls. No wine that's been aged in caves for decades. You're eating bread. Flat, unleavened bread that's been baked on hot stones and has the texture of leather that's been left in the sun too long. If you're lucky, you might have some cheese made from goat's milk that's been sitting in clay pots for weeks. The cheese has developed its own ecosystem by now, a little fuzzy around the edges, with a tang that could wake the dead. But protein is protein, and in the Persian Empire you eat what you can get. Akabala hers anayin deeble. Accompanying your gourmet breakfast is the drink of choice for common Persians, weak beer. Not because you're an alcoholic, mind you, but because the water quality in most parts of the empire ranges from questionable to actively hostile. The brewing process kills most of the things swimming in the local wells that might otherwise kill you. It's the ancient equivalent of water purification tablets, except it takes longer and makes you slightly dizzy. As you chew your leather bread and sip your questionable beer, take a moment to appreciate the logistical miracle that made this meal possible. That grain came from somewhere, maybe Egypt, maybe Mesopotamia, maybe a farm in Bactria that's 2,000 miles away. It was harvested by farmers who paid taxes to local officials who reported to satraps who sent tribute to the king. The salt in your cheese? It might have come from mines in Persia proper, carried along the royal road by merchants who paid tolls at every checkpoint. The clay pot holding your beer, made by potters whose workshop is registered with the imperial administration, and whose production quotas are tracked by scribes who can't even pronounce your name. But here's where your Persian breakfast gets really interesting. You have to eat it while being grateful. Not just politely grateful, but performatively, publicly grateful to the King of Kings whose benevolent rule makes this meal possible. Complaining about the food is complaining about the empire, and complaining about the empire is treason. So you sit there, chewing your stone-hard bread and drinking your cloudy beer, while mentally composing the little prayer of thanks that good Persian subjects are expected to mumble before meals. May Ahura Mazda bless the King of Kings, may his reign be eternal, may his enemies be scattered like dust before the wind. And if the local tax collector happens to walk by while you're eating, you'd better smile and nod, and maybe offer to share your meager breakfast, because hospitality to imperial officials isn't just good manners, it's a survival strategy. Breakfast in the Persian Empire isn't just about nutrition, it's about remembering your place in the cosmic order, being grateful for imperial beneficence, and somehow managing to swallow bread that could be used as construction material. Bon appetit, citizen. Try not to chip a tooth. You've survived breakfast without committing any obvious acts of rebellion, so now it's time to report to work. And in the Persian Empire, everyone works for the king, even if they don't realize it. Whether you're a farmer, craftsman, merchant, or professional complainer, your labor ultimately serves the glory and wealth of the King of Kings. Let's say you're a farmer, because most people in the empire are farmers. Your day begins before sunrise, not because you're particularly ambitious, but because the heat will be unbearable by midday, and you need to get as much work done as possible before the sun turns your fields into a furnace. You grab your wooden plough as if you're wealthy enough to own one, and head out to your plot of land. Notice I said your land. But that's a bit of an overstatement. You farm it, you improve it, you know every stone and furrow, but the king owns it. You're basically a tenant farmer on a cosmic scale, and your landlord happens to rule most of the known world. Your crops don't all belong to you either. A significant portion goes directly to the royal treasury as tax. Another portion goes to the local satrap as tribute. Some goes to maintain the local garrison of soldiers. A bit more goes to support the provincial administration, and some gets stored in royal granaries as emergency supplies for the army. By the time everyone has taken their cut, you're left with just enough grain to keep your family alive until next harvest. If the harvest is bad, well, that's between you and whatever gods you're allowed to worship this week. If you're a craftsman, things are a little different but not necessarily better. Let's say you're a metal worker. The iron you work with, it comes from royal mines. The tools you use, made with royal permission. The techniques you employ, probably learned from craftsmen who were imported from other parts of the empire as part of massive population transfers. The Persian Empire has a habit of moving people around like chess pieces. Skilled craftsmen from conquered territories get relocated to areas where their skills are needed. Rebels get resettled far from their homelands. Entire populations sometimes get shuffled around to prevent local loyalties from developing. So your metalworking techniques might be Lydian, your design motifs might be Egyptian, and your raw materials might come from Bactrian mines. But you're working in a Persian city, making Persian goods for Persian customers under Persian supervision. And speaking of supervision, there's always someone watching. The local administrator keeps track of production quotas. The satrap's representatives monitor quality and ensure that the best pieces go to Persepolis as tribute. Royal inspectors show up occasionally to make sure everyone is following proper procedures and maintaining loyalty to the crown. Even merchants who you might think have some independence are tightly controlled. Trade routes are managed by the state. Currency is standardized and regulated. Our major commercial transactions require official documentation, and if you want to trade with foreign kingdoms, you'd better make sure your business deals align with imperial foreign policy. While the Persian Empire doesn't just tax your work, Nice, it organizes it, directs it, and uses it as a tool of state policy. Your individual skills and labor are components in a vast machine designed to generate wealth and power for the King of Kings. By midday, you're exhausted, sunburned and covered in dust or metal filings or whatever occupational hazard your work involves. But don't think about stopping yet. The empire doesn't believe in short work days, and neither do the local officials who are tracking your productivity. The sun beats down mercilessly, and you begin to understand why the Persian Empire needs such an extensive administrative system. Someone has to organize all this suffering efficiently. As you toil away in the blazing Persian sun, remember that you're being governed by one of the most sophisticated administrative systems ever devised. Somewhere in a palace you'll never see, your satrap, the king's appointed governor for your province, is making decisions that will affect your life in ways you can't imagine. The satrap system is the Persian Empire's greatest innovation and your greatest burden. Instead of trying to rule this vast empire directly, the King of Kings has divided it into about 20 satrapies, each governed by a hand-picked administrator who rules with absolute authority in the king's name. Your satrap is probably Persian nobility, possibly a relative of the king himself. He lives in a palace that makes your mud brick house look like a chicken coop. He eats delicacies imported from across the empire while you chew on bread that could be used as a weapon. He has servants to fan him while he makes decisions about your taxes, your freedoms, and occasionally your life. But here's the thing about satraps. They're caught in the same system that controls you, just with better food and more comfortable prisons. The king doesn't trust them any more than he trusts you, maybe less, because they actually have power. Every satrap is watched by royal spies called the eyes and ears of the king, Hall. These agents report directly to Persepolis, bypassing the satrap entirely. They monitor loyalty, efficiency, and any signs of potential rebellion. If a satrap gets too comfortable, too popular with his subjects, or too independent in his decision-making, he might find himself recalled to the capital for consultations that he may not survive. The satrap's court is a miniature version of the royal court at Persepolis, complete with ceremony, hierarchy, and paranoia. Minor officials compete for the satrap's favor, while simultaneously trying to position themselves to survive if he falls from grace. Everyone smiles and bows and speaks in carefully measured phrases designed to convey loyalty without promising too much. And all of this political theater trickles down to you. The local tax collectors who demand your grain are trying to meet quotas set by administrators, who are trying to impress supervisors, who are trying to avoid disappointing the satrap who is trying not to be executed by the king. Your daily life is shaped by this pyramid of pressure. When the satrap needs more revenue for a royal tribute, your taxes go up. When he needs to demonstrate his administrative efficiency, new regulations appear overnight. When he needs to show his loyalty to the crown, local enforcement becomes more zealous. The truly maddening part is that you probably don't even know your satrap's name. He's a distant figure in a far-off palace, making decisions based on reports written by people who have never spoken to you. You're governed by abstractions, tax assessments, productivity quotas, loyalty requirements, all filtered through layers of bureaucracy until they bear no resemblance to human needs or local realities. But the satrap knows about you. Oh yes, the empire keeps excellent records. Your name, your occupation, your family relationships, your tax payments, your compliance with local regulations. It's all written down somewhere in the provincial archives. You're a data point in an imperial spreadsheet, and the satrap can call up your file whenever he wants. As the afternoon heat reaches its peak, you might catch a glimpse of the satrap's representatives making their rounds. Well-dressed men on good horses, accompanied by guards and scribes. They're collecting information, checking compliance, making sure the imperial machine runs smoothly. They don't see you as a person. You're a resource to be managed, a revenue source to be optimized, a potential security risk to be monitored. Is the satrap's shadow falls across your life every day, shaping your possibilities without ever acknowledging your humanity. And the worst part, this system actually works. The Persian Empire endures for over 2 centuries because the satraps are efficient, the bureaucracy is thorough, and the subjects are kept too busy surviving to organize effective resistance. Welcome to the most successful authoritarian administrative system the ancient world ever created. Now get back to work before someone notices you thinking too much. Just when you think your day in the Persian Empire can't get more complicated, it's time for your afternoon prayers. Because in addition to being a subject of the King of Kings, you're also expected to be a faithful follower of Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, who supposedly guides all Persian royal policy. In the religion in the Persian Empire isn't a private matter or a weekend activity. It's state policy, administrative doctrine, and daily requirement, all rolled into one suffocating package. The empire follows Zoroastrianism, a religion that divides the world into good and evil, light and darkness, truth and lies. And guess what? The King of Kings represents good, light, and truth, while his enemies represent evil, darkness, and lies. How convenient. You're expected to face the sun and recite prayers that acknowledge Ahura Mazda as the one true God and the King of Kings as his earthly representative. These aren't optional devotions, they're loyalty tests administered several times a day. Local officials take note of who participates enthusiastically and who seems to be just going through the motions. The prayers themselves are in Old Persian, a language you probably don't understand very well. But that's not the point. You're not supposed to think about what you're saying. You're supposed to demonstrate obedience to imperial religious policy. Recite the words, make the gestures, show proper reverence, and hope someone in authority notices your piety. Fire temples dot the landscape, each one maintained by Zoroastrian priests who serve both religious and administrative functions. These priests don't just tend to spiritual needs. They're part of the imperial bureaucracy, keeping records of religious compliance and reporting on local loyalty levels. The sacred fires in these temples are supposed to burn eternally, symbolizing the eternal truth of Ahura Mazda and the eternal rule of the Persian dynasty. Letting a sacred fire go out is both a religious sin and a political crime, punishable by fines, public humiliation, and possibly worse. But here's where things get really interesting from a survival perspective. The Persian Empire is famously tolerant of local religions. As long as you acknowledge the supremacy of Ahura Mazda and the divine authority of the king, you're allowed to keep worshipping your local gods. You can hedge your bets spiritually while staying politically safe. This tolerance isn't kindness, it's smart imperial policy. The Persians learned that forcing complete religious conversion creates more problems than it solves. Better to let people keep their familiar gods while adding Persian religious obligations on top. More complexity, less rebellion. So you might spend your morning praying to Ahura Mazda, your afternoon making offerings to local deities, and your evening participating in community rituals that predate the Persian conquest by centuries. It's exhausting, but it covers all your spiritual bases while keeping you in compliance with imperial requirements. The religious calendar is packed with festivals, observances, and ceremonial obligations. Nowruz, the Persian New Year, requires specific rituals and public displays of loyalty. Royal birthdays and military victories call for special prayers and community celebrations. Religious holidays from conquered territories get absorbed into the imperial calendar, creating a bewildering schedule of required observances, and all of this religious activity is taxed. Special contributions for temple maintenance, mandatory gifts for religious festivals, ceremonial offerings that somehow always end up in royal treasuries. The empire has figured out how to monetize divine worship. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, you finish your afternoon prayers and wonder how you're supposed to keep track of all these religious obligations while still finding time to work, eat, and sleep. The answer is simple. You're not supposed to have time for anything else. Constant religious observance keeps you too busy to think about resistance or revolution. Your relationship with the divine has been nationalized, bureaucratized, and turned into another tool of imperial control. Even your prayers serve the King of Kings. May Ahura Mazda bless your confusion and sanctify your exhaustion. Amen. As afternoon fades into evening, you might notice something unsettling about the imperial soldiers patrolling your area. They're too perfect, too uniform, too mechanically precise in their movements. These aren't ordinary troops. These are the immortals, the king's elite guard, and their presence in your provincial town means something important is happening. The immortals are called immortal, not because they can't die, but because their unit strength never changes. There are always exactly 10,000 of them. When one falls in battle, gets sick, or ages out of service, he's immediately replaced. From the outside, it looks like the same undying force has been guarding Persian kings for generations. Suabaris, Noe, they're the most disciplined, best equipped, and most feared military unit in the known world. Their weapons are works of art, their armor is impeccable, and their loyalty to the crown is absolute. They've never been defeated in open battle, never broken ranks under pressure, and never shown mercy to enemies of the empire. And right now they're in your town. Maybe they're here to escort a royal envoy carrying sealed orders from the king. Maybe they're investigating reports of disloyalty or tax evasion. Maybe they're just passing through on their way to crush a rebellion in a neighboring province. Whatever the reason, Their presence transforms the atmosphere from merely oppressive to genuinely terrifying. The immortals don't interact with common subjects like you. They don't shop in local markets, drink in local taverns, or acknowledge local customs. They exist in a bubble of imperial authority, following orders that come directly from Persepolis, and recognizing no law except the will of the King of Kings. Local officials suddenly become very nervous when the immortals are around. The same administrators who normally act like petty tyrants turn into anxious servants, eager to demonstrate their efficiency and loyalty. Everyone knows that the immortals report directly to the king, bypassing all local authority. You watch them from a safe distance, noting their matching equipment, synchronized movements, and complete indifference to their surroundings. They're not quite human anymore. They're components in a military machine that serves purposes beyond your understanding. Their shields bear the image of a golden lion, symbol of royal power. Their spears are tipped with silver points that gleam in the evening light. Their robes are dyed in colors so expensive that a single garment costs more than you'll earn in your lifetime. They look like gods of war descended from some celestial realm where perfect order reigns supreme. But the truly unsettling thing about the immortals isn't their equipment or their training, it's their silence. They don't talk to each other unless necessary. They don't complain about the heat, the dust, or the long marches. They don't show curiosity about local customs or interest in local entertainment. They simply exist, like living embodiments of imperial will. This psychological effect is intentional. The immortals aren't just soldiers, they're propaganda. Their presence reminds everyone that the king's power is unlimited, his reach is infinite, and his ability to enforce obedience is absolute. They represent the impossibility of successful resistance and the futility of individual rebellion. As you hurry past their camp on your way home, you can hear the soft sounds of their evening routines. The whisper of steel being cleaned, the rustle of silk as they adjust their robes, the quiet efficiency of a military unit that operates like clockwork. There's no laughter, no casual conversation, no humanity to soften their intimidating presence. The immortals will be gone tomorrow, marching toward whatever destination their orders specify, but their visit will be remembered for months. Children will have nightmares about the silent soldiers in golden robes. Adults will speak more carefully about imperial policies. The local tax collection will become more efficient, the religious observances more enthusiastic, the displays of loyalty more frequent. 10,000 men who might as well be one man, serving a king who rules like a god. In the Persian Empire, even the army is a philosophical statement about the nature of absolute power. Sleep well tonight, citizen. The immortals are watching over you. Whether that's a comfort or a threat depends entirely on your perspective. Evening has arrived, friend. With it comes the most dangerous meal of your Persian day dinner. Not because the food is particularly hazardous, though it probably is, but because dinner time is when Persian families are expected to honor their ancestors, demonstrate their cultural knowledge, and somehow manage to eat without committing any social violations that might be reported to local authorities. Persian dinner customs are elaborate, hierarchical, and loaded with opportunities for embarrassment or worse. The way you sit, the order in which you eat, the stories you tell, and the prayers you recite all carry social and political significance that can affect your family's standing in the community. You gather with your family around a cloth spread on the floor because chairs are for Greeks and Romans, not for proper Persians. The seating arrangement isn't random. It reflects age, gender, family relationships, and social status in ways that would take an anthropologist years to fully understand. Sit in the wrong spot, and you've just announced that you don't understand Persian social hierarchy. The meal begins with prayers to Ahura Mazda, followed by acknowledgements of the King of Kings, then tributes to family ancestors. These aren't quick mumbled blessings. They're formal recitations that everyone is expected to know by heart. Mess up the words, skip a section, or show insufficient reverence, and your family's reputation for proper Persian values takes a hit. The food itself is a testament to the empire's vast trade networks, and your family's modest place within them. Rice from India, spices from Arabia, dried fruits from Sogdiana, nuts from Persia proper. Everything has traveled hundreds or thousands of miles to reach your dinner cloth, and each ingredient represents both imperial prosperity and your own economic limitations. You can afford the rice, but not much to go with it. You have a few spices, but not enough to make the meal truly flavorful. The fruits are dried because fresh ones are too expensive, and the nuts are mostly shells because actual nuts cost more than you can justify spending on a single meal. As you eat, you're expected to participate in the evening's entertainment, which consists mainly of storytelling about Persian heroes, recitations of royal genealogies, and discussions of imperial achievements. This isn't casual conversation, it's cultural education designed to reinforce loyalty and Persian identity. Someone might tell the story of Cyrus the Great and how he conquered Babylon without a fight, demonstrating the superior wisdom and benevolence of Persian rule. Another family member might recite the lineage of the current king, showing how his divine authority descends from an unbroken line of divinely chosen rulers. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're loyalty tests. Your reactions are being noted, your enthusiasm measured, your knowledge evaluated. Show too little interest, and you might be considered insufficiently Persian. Show too much interest in the wrong details, and you might be suspected of harboring political ambitions. Children are expected to listen quietly and ask appropriate questions that demonstrate their developing understanding of Persian values. Adults are expected to contribute stories that support the evening's themes while avoiding anything that might be construed as criticism of imperial policies. The meal stretches on for hours, not because there's that much food, but because proper Persian dinner customs require extended discussion of cultural and political topics. You can't just eat and leave menu. You have to demonstrate your commitment to Persian civilization through active participation in these ritualized conversations. And throughout the entire meal, you're acutely aware that your neighbors might be listening. Family dinners aren't private affairs in communities where houses are built close together and walls are thin. Local informants might note which families seem insufficiently enthusiastic about imperial glory, and such observations have a way of reaching official ears. By the time the meal finally ends, you're exhausted from the effort of maintaining proper deportment, reciting appropriate responses, and avoiding any statements that might be misinterpreted as disloyalty. You've spent more energy on social performance than on actual eating. As you help clean up the dinner cloth and put away the dishes, you reflect on the fact that even family meals in the Persian Empire serve the interests of state control. There's no escape from imperial authority, no private space where you can just be yourself without considering the political implications of every word and gesture. Dinner is over, but the performance continues. In the Persian Empire, even digestion is a civic duty. As darkness settles over your corner of the Persian Empire, you might think the day's official obligations are finally over. You'd be wrong. Nighttime in the Persian Empire brings its own set of administrative requirements, social expectations, and opportunities for accidentally committing crimes against imperial dignity. The first thing you notice as evening turns to night is how quiet everything becomes. Not peaceful quiet, Nervous quiet. Persian towns and cities are governed by strict curfew laws that vary by province, social class, and current security situation. Being out after the approved hours without proper documentation can result in arrest, interrogation, and punishment that ranges from fines to flogging. The curfew isn't just about public order, it's about information control. The Persian Empire functions on surveillance, and surveillance is easier when people's movements are predictable and restricted. Night travel requires special permits that document your destination, your purpose, and your expected return time. Even then, you might be stopped and questioned by imperial guards who have the authority to detain you indefinitely. From your modest dwelling, you can hear the sounds of the empire continuing its work through the night. Somewhere, royal messengers are riding through the darkness, carrying sealed orders from the capital. Somewhere, treasury officials are counting the day's tax collections by lamplight. Somewhere, provincial administrators are writing reports that will eventually reach the desk of the King of Kings himself. The empire never sleeps because surveillance never sleeps. Intelligence gathering continues around the clock, fed by a network of informants who report on everything from grain prices to suspicious conversations to unusual travel patterns. Your local community includes people whose job is to watch other people and report anything that might indicate disloyalty, rebellion, or inefficiency. But it's not just official surveillance you need to worry about. Persian social culture encourages citizens to monitor each other's compliance with imperial values. Neighbors note which families seem insufficiently grateful for royal benevolence. Community leaders track attendance at religious observances. Local merchants remember who asks too many questions about tax policies or trade regulations. This creates a nighttime atmosphere of paranoid courtesy. If you meet someone after dark, mystify, perhaps on your way back from religious observances or emergency family business, you greet them with elaborate demonstrations of mutual loyalty to the crown. No casual conversation, no personal complaints, no discussions that might be misinterpreted as political criticism. The approved topics for nighttime social interaction include praise for imperial achievements, gratitude for royal protection, optimism about provincial prosperity, and admiration for Persian cultural superiority. Anything else is potentially dangerous territory that could result in reports to local authorities. Sleep itself becomes complicated in a surveillance state. Do you talk in your sleep? Do you have dreams that might be interpreted as prophetic or politically significant? Do members of your household make suspicious noises that could be misconstrued as secret meetings or coded communications? Persian culture places great emphasis on dream interpretation, but not the fun kind where you figure out what your subconscious is trying to tell you. Imperial dream interpretation focuses on identifying potential threats to royal authority. Dreams about lions might indicate ambitions to royal power. Dreams about foreign lands might suggest disloyalty to the empire. Dreams about fire might be connected to religious heresy. Smart Persian subjects learn to edit their dream reports, sharing only the politically safe visions while keeping the potentially problematic ones to themselves. But even this is risky, because withholding information from authorities is itself a form of disloyalty. As you finally settle down for the night, you perform the required evening prayers, express the mandatory gratitude for imperial protection, and try to clear your mind of any thoughts that might be considered treasonous. You're going to sleep in an empire that monitors not just your actions and words, but your dreams and subconscious expressions. The Persian Empire has perfected the art of making people police themselves. You don't just obey the law, you internalize imperial values so completely that rebellion becomes literally unthinkable. The empire doesn't just control your body, it colonizes your mind. Sweet dreams, citizen. Try not to dream anything that might be interpreted as sedition. The empire is listening, even when you sleep. Before you drift off to sleep in your modest Persian dwelling, let's talk about the bill for all this imperial magnificence. Because living in the greatest empire the world has ever seen comes with a price tag that would make modern taxpayers weep. And guess who gets to pay it? The Persian Empire isn't just vast, it's expensive. Maintaining royal palaces that cover acres and employ thousands of servants costs money. Feeding an army of professional soldiers spread across 3 continents costs money. Building and maintaining roads that connect India to Greece costs money. And that money comes from you. Extracted through a tax system so comprehensive and efficient that it makes the IRS look like amateurs. Your tax burden begins with the basic land tax, calculated as a percentage of your theoretical agricultural output, whether you actually achieve that output or not. Bad harvest, tough luck. The tax is based on what the land should produce under ideal conditions with perfect weather and divine blessing. Drought, flood, locust swarms and other acts of nature are your problem, not the empire's. Then there's the tribute tax, which is separate from the land tax and is meant to fund specific imperial projects. Building a new palace, tribute tax. Expanding the royal road, tribute tax. The king wants to add another wing to Persepolis. Guess what? Myas. Tribute tax. Military service tax comes next, which you can pay either in service or in gold. Most people can't afford the gold, so you end up spending months away from your farm or workshop, serving in the imperial army without pay while your family struggles to maintain your livelihood back home. The empire gets free labor, and you get the privilege of risking your life for kings you'll never meet. Religious obligations carry their own financial requirements. Temple maintenance fees, ceremonial gift expectations, festival contributions, and mandatory offerings to demonstrate your piety and loyalty. Somehow, serving the gods always seems to involve enriching the imperial treasury. Trade taxes hit you whether you're buying or selling. Import duties on goods from other provinces, export fees on local products, market stall licenses, merchant registration costs, and transportation tolls that apply every time goods cross provincial boundaries. By the time a simple item reaches your hands, it's been taxed so many times that the final price bears little resemblance to its actual production cost. Don't forget the administrative fees that fund the very bureaucracy that's taxing you. Costs for maintaining court records, paying scribes, supporting provincial governors, and funding the spy networks that watch you for signs of tax evasion. You're literally paying for the privilege of being surveilled and controlled. Emergency levies appear whenever the empire faces unexpected expenses. Military campaigns against rebels, diplomatic gifts to foreign kingdoms, reconstruction after natural disasters, or simply because the king has decided he needs more golden statues. These emergency taxes are always described as temporary measures, but somehow they never quite disappear. The truly maddening part is that all these taxes are collected in different ways at different times by different officials. You can't just write one big check and be done with it. You're constantly dealing with tax collectors, tribute assessors, fee evaluators, and imperial auditors who show up at irregular intervals, demanding payments you may or may not have been expecting. And if you can't pay, the empire has solutions. Your property can be confiscated and sold. Your family members can be taken as collateral. You can be forced into debt slavery until you work off what you owe. In extreme cases, you can be relocated to a different province where imperial authorities think you might be more economically productive. The Persian Empire has turned taxation into high art. Every economic activity, every social interaction, every religious observance has been monetized and turned into a revenue stream for the imperial treasury. You're not just a subject, you're a profit center. But here's the really clever part. All this taxation is presented as evidence of imperial beneficence. You should be grateful that the King of Kings allows you to participate in funding the greatest civilization in history. You should feel honored that your modest contributions help maintain the glory of Persepolis. You should consider yourself blessed to live under a system so well organized that it can extract wealth efficiently from every corner of a continent-spanning empire. As you fall asleep on your straw mat, surrounded by the modest possessions that represent everything left over after the empire has taken its share, remember that you're part of something historically unprecedented. Never before has a single government successfully taxed so many people across such vast distances with such bureaucratic thoroughness. You're being bled dry by the most efficient administrative machine in human history. Sleep tight. Just when you think you understand the scope of your oppression, dawn breaks on another day in the Persian Empire, and you remember that your little corner of this vast domain is connected to places you've never heard of through trade networks that span the known world. And somehow, even international commerce is designed to remind you of your insignificance. The Persian Empire sits at the center of the ancient world's trade routes, controlling the flow of goods between east and west, north and south. Silk from China, spices from India, gold from Nubia, amber from the Baltic, precious stones from Central Asia. It all flows through Persian territory, and every caravan, every merchant, every valuable commodity pays tribute to the King of Kings. You can see evidence of this global reach in the most mundane aspects of your daily life. The iron in your farming tools might have come from mines in Armenia. The salt preserving your food could have traveled from deposits near the Caspian Sea. Even the clay in your water jars might have been mixed with materials from distant provinces to achieve the proper consistency. But you don't benefit from living at the center of the world's trade networks. You're just a local resource to be exploited in service of global commerce. Your grain feeds the caravans passing through your region. Your labor maintains the roads they travel. Your taxes pay for the soldiers who protect them from bandits. And if your local production isn't sufficient to meet the needs of international trade, well, your needs become secondary to imperial economic priorities. Merchant caravans passing through your area are like mobile displays of wealth and power that you'll never possess. Hundreds of camels loaded with goods worth more than your entire community will ever see, guarded by professional soldiers, managed by merchants who speak a dozen languages and carry documents sealed with imperial stamps that grant them privileges you can't imagine. These merchants don't just trade in goods, they trade in information. They carry news from the capital, rumors from distant provinces, stories about foreign kingdoms, and gossip about imperial policy changes that might affect local conditions. But this information isn't shared freely. Knowledge, like everything else in the Persian Empire, is a commodity to be bought and sold. If you want to know whether new tax policies are being implemented, whether military conflicts might disrupt local trade, whether changes in imperial succession might affect provincial administration, well, you'd better have something valuable to offer in exchange for that information. The caravan routes also bring cultural influences that you're expected to admire but not adopt. Foreign styles in clothing, architecture and decoration that demonstrate the empire's cosmopolitan sophistication. Art objects and luxury goods, that show the superiority of imperial taste, religious practices, and philosophical ideas that prove the empire's tolerance and wisdom. But this cultural exchange is strictly one way. You're supposed to appreciate the diversity and sophistication that imperial trade brings to your region while maintaining your local Persian identity, and never developing inconvenient loyalties to foreign ideas or practices. The most frustrating part is watching valuable goods flow past your community without ever stopping. Caravans carrying silk, spices, precious metals, and manufactured goods from the far corners of the empire pass by regularly. But these treasures aren't for local consumption. They're destined for royal palaces, wealthy merchants in major cities, or export to foreign kingdoms. Your role in this global economy is to provide basic necessities: food, water, fodder for animals, simple repairs and manual labor, while watching the real wealth flow past you toward destinations you'll never see. You're a service station on the ancient equivalent of an interstate highway, providing fuel and maintenance for travelers heading to more important places. Sometimes caravans will stop to trade for local products, but the exchange rates are never in your favor. Your grain, crafts, or livestock are valued at local prices, while manufactured goods from distant provinces carry premium costs that reflect their exotic origins and transportation expenses. And don't think about trying to establish your own trading relationships with these passing merchants. Commercial arrangements require licenses, documentation, tax arrangements, and imperial approval. Unauthorized trading is considered a form of tax evasion and can result in confiscation of goods, heavy fines, and possible criminal charges. The Persian Empire has created the world's first truly global economy, but it's designed to benefit the center while keeping the periphery in permanent economic dependency. You're connected to the wealth of Asia, but that connection only flows in one direction: forward, the imperial treasury. As another caravan disappears toward the horizon, bells jingling and drivers singing in languages you don't recognize, you're reminded once again that you live in the greatest empire in history. You just don't get to enjoy any of the benefits. Back to work, citizen. Those caravans won't service themselves. Midday in the Persian Empire brings not just scorching heat, but also the daily reminder of what imperial wealth can accomplish when it's not constrained by considerations like human suffering or economic reality. Somewhere in your province, probably too far away for you to visit, but close enough for you to know it exists, there's a royal garden that represents everything you'll never have, and everywhere you'll never go. Persian royal gardens, called perida, from which we get our word paradise, are more than just landscaping projects. They're political statements, religious symbols, and demonstrations of the empire's ability to impose artificial order on the natural world. These gardens recreate the ideal landscape of the Iranian plateau in microcosm, complete with flowing water, geometric designs, and plants from every corner of the empire. The garden nearest to your community probably covers more land than your entire village, and employs more people than live in your extended family. Teams of gardeners, water engineers, botanical specialists, and security guards work year-round to maintain an environment so artificially perfect that it seems to exist outside the normal laws of nature. Water flows uphill through ingenious engineering systems that channel mountain streams through underground channels, decorative fountains, and reflecting pools that never seem to evaporate, despite the blazing desert sun. The water is cleaner than what you drink, and there's more of it used for decoration in a single day than your family consumes in a month. The plants themselves tell the story of the empire's reach. Roses from Damascus, fruit trees from Sogdiana, cypress from the Zagros Mountains, lotus flowers from Egypt, and aromatic herbs from Arabia. Each plant represents a conquered territory, a successful military campaign, or a diplomatic alliance that brings exotic beauty to serve imperial pleasure. But these gardens aren't just about luxury, they're about control. The same administrative efficiency that governs tax collection and military organization is applied to creating artificial environments where every leaf, every flower, every drop of water serves a predetermined aesthetic purpose. Nature itself has been conquered and reorganized according to royal preferences. The geometric layout of these gardens reflects Persian cosmology and political philosophy. The four-part design represents the four corners of the empire, the four seasons, the four elements, and the four directions from which the king receives tribute. Walking through these gardens is like moving through a three-dimensional map of imperial power. You'll never see the inside of these gardens, of course. They're reserved for royal family members, high-ranking officials, and foreign dignitaries who need to be impressed with Persian wealth and sophistication. The closest you'll come is glimpsing them from the outside, where high walls and armed guards ensure that common subjects don't contaminate the artificial paradise with their presence. But you pay for these gardens through your taxes, and you maintain them through your labor. The water systems require constant engineering work performed by skilled craftsmen who are conscripted from local communities. The plants need soil improvements, fertilizers, and pest control that consume resources from across the province. The security and maintenance staff eat food that comes from farms like yours. Local communities are sometimes required to provide specialized labor for garden projects, building new fountains, installing irrigation systems, constructing decorative pavilions, or transplanting mature trees from their natural habitats to serve royal aesthetic preferences. This work is presented as an honor, but it's actually mandatory service that takes you away from your own land during critical agricultural periods. The gardens also serve as testing grounds for agricultural innovations that might eventually benefit the broader empire. New cultivation techniques, improved crop varieties, and advanced irrigation methods are developed in these controlled environments before being implemented on a larger scale. So in theory, your taxes fund research that might someday improve your own farming efficiency. In practice, however, most innovations remain in the royal gardens because implementing them widely would require investments that the imperial treasury prefers to spend on more gardens, more palaces, and more demonstrations of royal magnificence. The most maddening aspect of these gardens is how they represent everything that's possible when unlimited resources are applied to a single project. The engineering brilliance, botanical knowledge, and artistic vision that create these artificial paradises prove that the Persian Empire possesses the technical capability to solve problems like water scarcity, agricultural productivity, and environmental management. But these capabilities are only applied to projects that serve royal pleasure rather than public welfare. The same empire that can make water flow uphill to fill decorative pools somehow can't manage to provide clean drinking water to all its subjects. As you toil in the afternoon heat, sweating through work that barely provides enough food to keep your family alive, you can sometimes see in the distance the green oasis where trees provide shade, water flows freely, and beauty serves no purpose beyond the pleasure of people who will never want for anything. The Persian Empire can create paradise on earth. It just doesn't create it for you. As the afternoon heat reaches its merciless peak, you realize that even communication in the Persian Empire is a form of political submission. The languages you speak, the words you're allowed to use, and the concepts you're permitted to express are all controlled by imperial policy. Even your thoughts are colonized by the state. The Persian Empire spans dozens of languages, hundreds of dialects, and countless local customs of speech and writing. But all official business, law, taxation, military orders, religious ceremonies, and royal proclamations is conducted in Old Persian, a language that's as foreign to most subjects as the politics of distant galaxies. You probably speak the local language of your region, maybe Aramaic, maybe Greek, maybe one of the dozens of indigenous tongues that predate the Persian conquest. But if you want to interact with imperial officials, apply for travel permits, lodge legal complaints, or participate in any activity that involves the imperial bureaucracy, you need to use Old Persian phrases and follow Persian linguistic protocols. This creates a communication system where power literally speaks a different language from the people it governs. Imperial officials can conduct conversations right in front of you that you can't understand, make decisions about your life using words you don't recognize, and issue orders that require translation before you can even begin to comply. Legal proceedings are particularly challenging because Persian law recognizes specific technical terms that have no equivalent in local languages. Concepts of property ownership, criminal responsibility, contractual obligation, and civil rights are defined according to Persian cultural assumptions that may conflict with local traditions. If you're accused of a crime, you need to mount your defense using Persian legal terminology that may not accurately describe the situation as you understand it. Your local customs, traditional remedies, and community standards of justice become irrelevant if they can't be expressed in ways that Persian courts recognize as valid. Religious language presents similar problems. Zoroastrian prayers, ceremonial formulas, and expressions of loyalty to the crown must be recited in precise Persian phrasing. Mispronunciation, incorrect word order, or translation errors can be interpreted as signs of insufficient devotion or outright blasphemy. But the most insidious aspect of linguistic control is how it shapes your thinking. Persian political concepts of absolute monarchy, imperial hierarchy, royal divinity, administrative efficiency become the only available frameworks for understanding government and social organization. Alternative ideas about leadership, community organization, and individual rights literally cannot be expressed in the approved imperial vocabulary. The Persian Empire doesn't just want your obedience, it wants your mental surrender. By controlling the language of politics, law, and religion, the empire controls the conceptual tools you use to understand your situation and imagine alternatives. Scribal education is limited to people who serve imperial interests, knight tax collectors, court officials, military administrators, and religious functionaries. These scribes don't just record information, they serve as interpreters between the imperial system and local populations, translating royal commands into local languages and local concerns into imperial bureaucratic terminology. But translation is never neutral. Persian scribes are trained to present imperial policies in ways that emphasize royal benevolence and administrative wisdom, while minimizing local hardships and grievances. They're cultural ambassadors for a system that benefits from linguistic confusion and conceptual submission. Written documents carry special authority in Persian administration, but literacy is deliberately kept scarce among common subjects. This means that contracts, legal rulings, tax assessments, and official orders are created and maintained by people who work for the imperial system, using language and concepts that serve imperial interests. You can't check their work because you can't read the documents that govern your life. You can't propose alternatives because you don't have access to the vocabulary of policy making. You can't organize resistance because you lack the conceptual tools for imagining different forms of government. The Persian Empire has weaponized language itself, turning communication into another tool of social control. Every conversation with imperial officials is a reminder of your educational limitations, cultural subordination, and political powerlessness. And the most brilliant part of this system is that it makes resistance almost impossible to organize. How do you plan a rebellion when the only available political vocabulary assumes the legitimacy of absolute monarchy? How do you criticize imperial policies when you lack the technical language needed to understand how those policies actually work? The empire doesn't just conquer territory, it conquers minds. And it starts with controlling the words you're allowed to think. By evening, your head is pounding from the effort of navigating linguistic minefields while trying to accomplish basic daily tasks. The Persian Empire has made even communication into a form of exhausting labor that serves the interests of people who will never learn to speak your language. Sweet dreams, citizen. Try not to think any thoughts that can't be expressed in approved imperial terminology. As night falls over your corner of the Persian Empire, it's time to contemplate one of the most bitter ironies of imperial life. You're living in the wealthiest political entity that has ever existed in human history, and you're probably poorer than your ancestors were before the conquest. The Persian Empire controls gold mines in Lydia, silver deposits in the Zagros Mountains, copper from Cyprus, iron from Armenia, and precious stones from Bactria. The royal treasury at Persepolis contains more wealth than most kingdoms could accumulate in centuries. The King of Kings literally sits on a throne made of precious metals, while receiving tribute that includes exotic goods from every corner of the known world. This imperial wealth isn't theoretical, you can see evidence of it everywhere. Royal roads paved with stones that cost more than houses, palaces decorated with precious metals and imported marbles, public works projects that employ thousands of workers and consume resources on scales that boggle the mind. The empire's wealth is real, vast, and constantly on display, but somehow none of this prosperity trickles down to you. The imperial economic system is designed to extract wealth from provinces and concentrate it in royal treasuries, not to improve living conditions for ordinary subjects. You're a resource to be harvested, not a beneficiary to be enriched. The Persian tax system is so efficient that it can strip surplus wealth from local communities faster than those communities can generate it. Your labor produces value that gets siphoned off through tribute payments, administrative fees, military levies, and religious obligations until you're left with just enough to survive until the next harvest. Local markets are flooded with luxury goods that you can't afford, imported foods that cost more than you earn in a week, and manufactured items that represent the technical achievements of imperial civilization. You're constantly surrounded by evidence of prosperity that exists entirely outside your economic reach. The currency system itself is designed to benefit imperial interests rather than local trade. Persian gold and silver coins carry premium values because they're backed by imperial authority, but they're too valuable for ordinary transactions. You're stuck using local currencies, barter systems, or credit arrangements that keep you economically isolated from the imperial mainstream. Debt becomes a permanent condition for most subjects because imperial tax demands often exceed local economic capacity. You borrow against future harvests to pay current obligations, creating cycles of economic dependency that ensure you'll never accumulate enough surplus to achieve real independence. The empire's prosperity also creates inflation that hits local communities particularly hard. Imperial demand for goods drives up prices faster than local wages can increase. The same items that your grandparents could afford easily now consume disproportionate shares of your family income. The most productive agricultural areas get converted to growing export crops that feed urban populations and support long-distance trade. Local food security becomes secondary to imperial economic priorities. Skilled craftsmanship gets recruited to serve imperial projects, draining local communities of their most talented producers. The best metalworkers, builders, artists and engineers are conscripted for royal construction projects, leaving behind communities that struggle to maintain basic infrastructure and productive capacity. Even when imperial prosperity creates local employment opportunities, the benefits are temporary and extractive. Building roads, constructing public works, or servicing trade caravans provides short-term income but doesn't create lasting economic improvement for local communities. The most maddening aspect of imperial prosperity is how it's presented as evidence of the empire's beneficence. You should be grateful to live under a system that has achieved such unprecedented wealth creation. You should feel proud that your modest contributions help maintain the greatest civilization in history. You should consider yourself fortunate to participate in an economic system that spans 3 continents. But the reality is that imperial prosperity is built on the systematic impoverishment of its subjects. The empire gets richer precisely because individual communities get poorer. The system works by extracting value from the periphery and concentrating it at the center, leaving behind populations that are economically dependent and politically powerless. As you settle down for another night of dreams about economic security you'll never achieve, remember that you're living through the greatest accumulation of wealth in human history up to this point. The Persian Empire represents the pinnacle of ancient economic achievement. You just don't get to enjoy any of it. The gold of Croesus flows through the empire's veins, but somehow it never reaches your wallet. Sleep tight, knowing that your poverty helps fund the most magnificent palaces ever built. As you drift towards sleep in your modest Persian dwelling, take a moment to consider the ghosts that surround you. Every stone in your house, every tool in your workshop, every custom you follow carries the memory of civilizations that fell to make the Persian Empire possible. You're living in a graveyard of kingdoms, and their bones are the foundation of your world. The Persian Empire didn't emerge from empty wilderness. It conquered some of the greatest civilizations in human history. Babylon, with its hanging gardens and astronomical achievements. Lydia, where coined money was invented. Egypt, with its pyramids and medical knowledge. The Greek cities of Ionia, where philosophy was born. Each conquest added territory, resources, and accumulated wisdom to the imperial storehouse. But conquest in the ancient world isn't just about changing flags and collecting tribute. It's about cultural obliteration, social restructuring, and the systematic erasure of everything that made the conquered peoples unique. The Persian Empire absorbs civilizations the way fire consumes wood, or leaving behind only the elements that serve imperial purposes. Your daily life is built on layers of cultural sediment from vanished kingdoms. The bread you eat is baked using techniques developed by Mesopotamian civilizations that no longer exist. The wine you drink is made from grapes cultivated by methods perfected in kingdoms that have been reduced to historical footnotes. The prayers you recite incorporate religious concepts borrowed from traditions that were systematically destroyed. Even your language carries the vocabulary of dead empires. Words for advanced concepts in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering survive in Persian usage, long after the cultures that created them have been reduced to archaeological sites. You speak with the tongues of ghosts, using knowledge that outlived the peoples who discovered it. The most haunting reminders are the ruins that dot the imperial landscape, crumbling walls from Assyrian cities, weathered statues from Egyptian temples, broken columns from Greek sanctuaries. These aren't historical curiosities, they're warnings. They show what happens to civilizations that can't adapt to Persian administrative efficiency. Some conquered peoples disappeared completely, absorbed into the imperial population through forced relocation, intermarriage and cultural assimilation. Others survive as ethnic minorities within the empire, maintaining fragments of their original identity while adapting to Persian political and economic structures. The truly successful conquered peoples are those who learn to serve imperial interests better than the Persians themselves. Greek engineers who design Persian siege engines, Babylonian astronomers who calculate imperial calendars, Egyptian physicians who treat Persian royalty. Survival in the Persian Empire often requires becoming more Persian than the Persians. But cultural absorption isn't always voluntary. The empire maintains policies of strategic population transfer that break up potentially troublesome ethnic groups by scattering them across distant provinces. Communities that might resist Persian rule when concentrated in their traditional homelands become manageable minorities when dispersed among populations with different languages, customs, and loyalties. Imperial records maintain detailed genealogies that track the ethnic origins of subject populations, but this information is used for administrative purposes rather than cultural preservation. The empire needs to know which groups might be prone to rebellion, which possess valuable skills, and which can be safely relocated without disrupting economic productivity. Your own family history probably includes ancestors who came from somewhere else in the empire, either as voluntary migrants following economic opportunities, or as involuntary resettlers moved to serve imperial demographic goals. The Persian Empire is a vast mixing bowl where cultures blend, compete, and sometimes disappear entirely. Religious practices follow similar patterns of absorption and transformation. Local deities get incorporated into the Persian pantheon with new names and modified attributes. Traditional festivals are adapted to celebrate imperial achievements alongside seasonal changes. Sacred sites are rebuilt to accommodate Persian architectural styles and administrative needs. The accumulated knowledge of conquered civilizations becomes imperial property, maintained in royal libraries and temple archives that serve administrative rather than cultural purposes. Ancient wisdom survives only insofar as it serves current imperial needs. Mathematical techniques that help with tax calculation are preserved. Philosophical traditions that question absolute monarchy are quietly forgotten. As you fall asleep in your Persian world, remember that you're surrounded by the achievements of peoples who no longer exist as independent cultures. Their knowledge, their skills, their accumulated wisdom have been absorbed into the imperial system that now governs your life. The Persian Empire isn't just vast and powerful, it's built from the carefully preserved remains of every civilization it has ever encountered. You're living in history's greatest recycling project, where the cultural achievements of the past are constantly being repurposed to serve the needs of eternal imperial expansion. Sweet dreams, citizen. Try not to think too hard about what happened to all the people who were here before the Persians arrived. And definitely don't wonder whether your own culture might someday become just another layer in some future empire's archaeological record. The dust of fallen kingdoms settles over everything in the Persian Empire, even your dreams. And there you have it, a single day in the Persian Empire. From the first rays of sun over the greatest administrative achievement in human history to the final moments of consciousness, in a world where even your dreams serve imperial purposes. You've survived bureaucratic efficiency that would make modern governments weep with envy, taxation systems that extract wealth with surgical precision, and surveillance networks that monitor not just your actions but your thoughts. As you settle into whatever passes for comfortable sleep in the ancient world, take a moment to appreciate what you've experienced. You've lived through a day in the most sophisticated governmental system ever created up to that point in human history. You've been governed by administrative innovations that wouldn't be matched again until the modern era. You've participated in economic networks that spanned 3 continents and connected civilizations that had never known each other existed. But you've also experienced something else. The human cost of perfected authoritarianism. The Persian Empire succeeded precisely because it figured out how to control every aspect of human life with bureaucratic efficiency that left no room for individual choice or local autonomy. It was the world's first totalitarian state, and it worked for over 2 centuries. The Persians didn't rule through crude force or religious fanaticism. They ruled through administrative excellence. They created systems for tax collection, information gathering, cultural control and social management that were so effective they became the template for every successful empire that followed. From Rome to China to the modern nation-state, the Persian model of centralized bureaucracy became the foundation of political organization. But efficiency isn't the same thing as humanity. The Persian Empire could move messages across continents faster than anyone had ever imagined possible, but it couldn't create systems that served human needs rather than imperial requirements. It could extract resources from the most remote provinces with mathematical precision, but it couldn't build an economy that provided prosperity for ordinary people. Sickness bursts in need day. The empire's greatest achievement was also its greatest tragedy. It proved that human beings could be organized, controlled, and administered with the same efficiency applied to any other natural resource. People became data points in imperial spreadsheets, components in administrative machines, resources to be optimized for maximum governmental benefit. Living in the Persian Empire meant being simultaneously connected to everything and in control of nothing. You were part of the greatest communication network in history, but you couldn't send messages. You participated in the most extensive trade system ever created, but you couldn't afford the goods flowing past your door. You were governed by the most sophisticated legal system in the world, but you couldn't understand the laws that controlled your life. The Persian Empire lasted for 220 years, from Cyrus the Great's conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE to Alexander the Great's victory at Gargamella in 331 BCE. During that time, it governed more people across a larger area with greater administrative efficiency than any political entity before it. It was by almost any measure the most successful empire in ancient history, and yet it fell, conquered by a Macedonian king who ruled for only 13 years, and left behind an empire that immediately fragmented into competing successor states. Alexander's victory didn't represent superior administration or better governmental system. It represented the ultimate limitation of bureaucratic control. Systems that can govern efficiently in peacetime often can't adapt quickly enough to survive military crisis. The Persian Empire's collapse reminds us that even the most perfect administrative machines are ultimately dependent on human beings who make imperfect decisions under pressure. All that bureaucratic efficiency, all those surveillance networks, all that accumulated wealth and administrative expertise, couldn't save the empire when it faced an enemy who refused to follow the established rules of civilized warfare. But the Persian governmental model didn't die with the empire. Its innovations in taxation, administration, communication, and social control were adopted by every subsequent empire that wanted to govern large territories with diverse populations. The Roman Empire built on Persian foundations. Islamic caliphates used Persian administrative techniques. Modern nation-states employ surveillance and taxation methods that would be familiar to ancient Persian officials. Today, when we worry about governmental overreach, bureaucratic inefficiency, or surveillance states, we're essentially worrying about updated versions of problems the Persians solved over 2,000 years ago. They figured out how to create governmental systems that could monitor, control, and extract resources from entire populations with unprecedented efficiency. The question that haunted Persian subjects still haunts us today. How much governmental efficiency is worth sacrificing for individual freedom? How much surveillance is acceptable in exchange for security? How much economic control should governments exercise in the name of administrative effectiveness? The Persian Empire provides both a warning and a model. It shows us what's possible when governmental systems prioritize efficiency over humanity, administrative control over individual autonomy, imperial glory over local welfare. But it also demonstrates techniques for organizing complex societies, managing diverse populations, and maintaining stability across vast territories. As you drift off to sleep in your comfortable modern bed, with your democratic institutions and your individual rights and your economic opportunities, remember the Persian subjects who dreamed of freedoms they couldn't name in languages they weren't allowed to speak. They lived in the shadow of the greatest empire in history, and they paid the price for that greatness every day of their lives. The Persian Empire was many things: vast, efficient, wealthy, sophisticated, and ultimately doomed. But above all, it was human, created by people, sustained by people, and finally destroyed by people who wanted something different from their governments than perfect administrative efficiency. Their empire fell, but their innovations live on in every tax form you fill out, every government database that tracks your activities, and every bureaucratic system that treats you as a case number rather than a human being. The Persians invented modern government, for better and for worse. Sweet dreams, citizen. Sleep well knowing that you live in a world the Persian Empire made possible, even if you'd never want to live in the Persian Empire itself. The King of Kings is dead, but his administrative legacy governs us still. And somewhere in the night, across the vast distances of time and space, the ghost of the royal road still carries messages between capitals that no longer exist, delivering orders from kings who ruled the world and left behind nothing but dust, bureaucracy, and the eternal human desire to be governed well rather than simply governed efficiently. The Persian Empire may be gone, but the questions it raised about power, administration, and human freedom echo through every governmental system that has existed since. We are all, in some sense, subjects of empires that learned their methods from the heirs of Cyrus the Great. May Ahura Mazda bless your dreams and keep them free from imperial taxation. The sun sets on the Persian Empire every night, but it rises again each morning in every capital where bureaucrats shuffle papers and governments claim to serve peoples they barely understand. History's greatest empire lives on in every form you sign and every regulation you follow. The Persians won after all, they just conquered time instead of space, ruling us from the grave with governmental techniques that proved too useful to abandon. Rest well knowing that you've survived a day in the Persian Empire and lived to tell about it. Not everyone was so fortunate. Before we close this journey through the Persian Empire, let's walk one more time along those famous roads that connected the ancient world. Because even as you sleep tonight in your modern bed, you're still traveling on pathways first carved by Persian engineers over 2 millennia ago. The Royal Road wasn't just about moving messages and armies, it was about moving ideas. Every merchant who traveled from Sardis to Susa carried more than goods in his caravan. He carried languages, customs, technologies and ways of thinking that had never met before. The Persian Empire didn't just conquer territory, it created the world's first global conversation. Mathematical concepts developed in Babylon found their way to Greek philosophers. Agricultural techniques from Egypt were adapted in the mountains of Bactria. Agricultural techniques from Egypt were adapted in the mountains of Bactria. Metallurgy innovations from Armenian mines improved weapon production across 3 continents. The Persian Empire became a vast laboratory where human knowledge was tested, refined, and redistributed on an unprecedented scale. But this exchange came at a cost that we're still calculating today. When ideas travel along imperial roads, they don't just spread, they transform. And sometimes they're transformed beyond recognition. Local traditions get absorbed into imperial systems and emerge as something entirely different. Indigenous knowledge gets translated into imperial languages and loses essential meanings in the process. The Persian approach to cultural exchange was pragmatic rather than respectful. They preserved what served imperial purposes and discarded what didn't. Ancient wisdom survived only if it could be weaponized for administrative efficiency or military advantage. Philosophical traditions that questioned absolute authority were quietly forgotten, while technical knowledge that improved taxation or control was carefully preserved. This selective cultural preservation created a kind of intellectual archaeology that we're still excavating today. Scattered through Persian records and ruins are fragments of lost civilizations, mathematical theorems from vanished kingdoms, medical treatments from extinct cultures, engineering solutions from peoples whose names we no longer remember. The Persian Empire was history's first great cultural recycling project. But like all recycling, the process changed the materials being preserved. What emerged from the imperial cultural fusion wasn't the same as what went in. New hybrid traditions developed that combined elements from multiple sources in ways that would have been impossible without imperial unification. These cultural innovations spread along the Royal Road network, creating the first truly international civilization. For the first time in human history, you could travel from India to Greece and encounter recognizable governmental systems, similar architectural styles, compatible currencies, and shared concepts of law and administration. But standardization always comes at the expense of diversity. The Persian Empire created the first global culture by systematically eliminating local variations that didn't serve imperial needs. Unique languages disappeared as administrative necessity favored imperial tongues. Distinctive art styles were homogenized to meet imperial aesthetic preferences. Local laws were superseded by imperial codes that prioritized uniformity over justice. The Persian model of cultural integration became the template for every subsequent empire. Rome adopted Persian administrative techniques, Islamic caliphates used Persian governmental structures, and modern nation-states employ Persian methods for managing diverse populations. The techniques for cultural absorption, linguistic control, and administrative standardization that the Persians pioneered are still being used today. When we worry about globalization destroying local cultures, when we see unique traditions disappearing under the pressure of international standardization, when we watch distinctive communities being absorbed into larger political and economic systems, we're witnessing updated versions of processes the Persians perfected over 2,000 years ago. The royal road still exists, though now it's made of fiber optic cables and satellite signals instead of stone and dirt. Information still travels faster than people can process it. Decisions are still made in distant capitals by officials who don't understand local conditions, and individual communities still find themselves swept along by forces they can't control or escape. But the Persian Empire also demonstrated something important about human resilience. Despite 2 centuries of systematic cultural pressure, despite forced relocations and administrative absorption, despite the overwhelming efficiency of imperial control, local traditions survived. Underground in families, in communities that maintained their identity even when they couldn't maintain their independence. When Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, he didn't find a homogenized population of imperial subjects. He found Greeks who were still Greek, Egyptians who were still Egyptian, Babylonians who were still Babylonian. The Persian administrative system had governed these peoples efficiently, but it hadn't erased their essential cultural identities. This suggests something hopeful about human nature and cultural persistence. Even the most efficient systems of control can't completely eliminate the human desire for community, tradition, and local identity. To Dolan Math, Horfairs, Inue. People find ways to preserve what matters to them, even under conditions that seem designed to make preservation impossible. The Persian Empire fell, but the peoples it governed survived to rebuild their own societies, create new forms of government, and develop fresh approaches to the eternal problems of organizing human communities. The administrative techniques survived too, adopted by new empires and adapted to new circumstances, but always serving human purposes rather than controlling them. As you sleep tonight, remember that you're connected to every person who ever walked the royal road, paid taxes to distant kings, struggled to maintain their identity under imperial pressure, or dreamed of freedom in languages they weren't supposed to speak. The Persian Empire may be history, but the human experiences it created echo through every governmental system that has existed since. The King of Kings is dead. Long live the King of Kings. The empire falls, the roads remain, and somewhere in the night, messages are still traveling between capitals that exist only in memory, carrying orders from ghosts to subjects who learned long ago that survival requires adaptation, resistance requires patience, and freedom requires forgetting nothing and forgiving less. Sweet dreams, citizen of the modern world. You've survived the Persian Empire too, just in a different century. The methods change, the technology improves, but the essential questions remain the same. How much control is necessary for good government? How much freedom is compatible with social order? How much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice for the security that comes with being part of something larger than yourself? The Persians asked these questions first, and we're still working on the answers. Their empire crumbled, but their legacy governs us still. flowing through the administrative DNA of every government that has learned to rule efficiently rather than well. May your dreams be free from imperial taxation, your sleep unmonitored by distant bureaucrats, and your rest untroubled by the knowledge that somewhere in the vast machinery of the modern world, the heirs of Persian efficiency are still hard at work, organizing the chaos of human existence into manageable administrative categories. The sun sets on every empire eventually, but the techniques of governance are immortal, passing from kingdom to kingdom, dynasty to dynasty, until the end of human civilization itself. We are all Persians now, whether we know it or not. History's greatest empire lives on in every form you sign, every regulation you follow, every tax you pay, and every moment when you realize that decisions about your life are being made by people you'll never meet, in places you'll never go for reasons you'll never fully understand. The Persian Empire succeeded so completely that it became invisible, absorbed into the fundamental structure of how human beings organize themselves into large, complex societies. We use their techniques, follow their examples, and repeat their mistakes while imagining we've invented something new. But perhaps that's fitting. The Persians always claimed their empire would last forever, and in a sense they were right. They just didn't realize that forever would mean becoming so fundamental to human civilization that no one would remember where these ideas came from. The King of Kings is dead. Long live the King of Kings. The empire is eternal, even when it doesn't exist, especially when it doesn't exist. Now sleep well knowing that you visited the Persian Empire and returned safely to your own time, carrying with you the knowledge that every governmental system you'll ever encounter learned its most effective techniques, from administrators who served kings whose names are carved on ruins in a desert that was once the center of the world. The royal road led everywhere, and everywhere it led, it left behind the foundations of the modern world. We are all still traveling that road, whether we know it or not. As our journey through the Persian Empire draws to a close, let's visit one more wonder that captures the essence of imperial ambition and human longing. Hidden within the administrative machinery and bureaucratic efficiency we've explored lies something that speaks to deeper human needs. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. These gardens, built during the height of Persian power, represent everything magnificent and troubling about imperial civilization. Here was beauty created through the systematic application of unlimited resources, engineering genius applied to the single purpose of creating paradise on earth, and human labor organized with mathematical precision to achieve something that transcended practical necessity. The gardens rose in terraced levels, each one supported by massive archways and irrigated by an ingenious system that lifted water from the Euphrates River through hidden channels and bronze pipes. Trees from every corner of the empire grew in artificial soil, their roots nourished by water that flowed uphill through human ingenuity. It was a forest suspended in the air, a mountain of greenery rising from the desert, a testament to what Persian engineering could accomplish when cost was no object. But like everything else in the Persian Empire, these gardens served multiple purposes beyond their obvious beauty. They were diplomatic tools, designed to impress foreign ambassadors with Persian wealth and technical capability. They were religious symbols, representing the Persian ideal of imposing order on chaos and making the desert bloom through human will. And they were political statements, demonstrating that Persian kings could reshape nature itself to serve their pleasure. Kedas from Lebanon, roses from Damascus, fruit trees from the mountains of Afghanistan, flowering vines from the hills of Armenia. Each species represented a conquered territory, a successful military campaign, a diplomatic alliance that brought exotic beauty to serve royal pleasure. The gardens were living maps of the empire, botanical collections that displayed Persian power more effectively than any written proclamation. The water systems that sustained these aerial gardens required the same administrative efficiency that governed the empire itself. Teams of engineers calculated flow rates and pressure requirements. Specialized craftsmen manufactured the bronze pipes and stone channels. Skilled gardeners maintained the delicate balance between different species. Administrative clerks tracked resource consumption and labor costs. Even paradise required bureaucracy. But the most remarkable thing about the Hanging Gardens wasn't their engineering or their beauty, it was their fragility. It was their fragility. Despite all the resources invested in their creation, despite the technical brilliance of their design, despite the armies of workers dedicated to their maintenance, the gardens required constant attention to survive. Stop the water flow for a few days, and the trees would begin to die. Neglect the soil management, and the root systems would fail. Reduce the maintenance staff, and the entire structure would begin to collapse. This fragility wasn't a design flaw. It was an inherent characteristic of artificial paradise. Beauty imposed on unwilling nature through human will, and unlimited resources could only be sustained through continued application of that same will and those same resources. The gardens were magnificent precisely because they were impossible, and they were impossible precisely because they depended on systems of control that couldn't be maintained forever. When the Persian Empire finally fell to Alexander the Great, the Hanging Gardens became one of the first casualties. Not because they were destroyed in battle, but because the administrative systems that sustained them collapsed. The engineers were reassigned, the craftsmen were conscripted for other projects, the water systems were neglected, and the careful balance that kept paradise alive gradually dissolved. Within a generation, the gardens had returned to dust. The terraces crumbled, the irrigation channels filled with sand, and the exotic trees died of thirst in the desert heat. What had taken decades to build and centuries to perfect disappeared in a few years of administrative chaos. The greatest garden in human history became a memory, then a legend, then a disputed footnote in historical records. Today, archaeologists aren't even certain where the gardens were located, much less how they functioned. The techniques that created them died with the empire that built them. The gardens have become one of history's great lost arts, a testament to human capability and human fragility existing in the same magnificent doomed project. But perhaps that's fitting. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon capture something essential about the Persian Empire itself. The amazing things that become possible when human organization reaches its peak efficiency, and the inevitable collapse that follows when those systems become too complex to sustain themselves. The gardens remind us that even the most beautiful achievements of imperial civilization are built on foundations of systematic control that most people never see and never benefit from. The exotic plants grew in soil, mixed with the labor of countless workers whose names were never recorded. The water flowed through pipes, manufactured by craftsmen who were never allowed to see the finished gardens. The beauty was maintained by gardeners who could be executed for letting a single tree die. Every paradise has its price, and the price is usually paid by people who never get to enjoy the paradise they help create. The Persian Empire specialized in creating wonders for the few through the systematic organization of labor provided by the many. The Hanging Gardens were just the most beautiful example of this fundamental imperial equation. As you settle into sleep tonight, perhaps you can imagine what it would have been like to walk through those gardens at their peak. The scent of flowers from around the world, the sound of water flowing through hidden channels, the sight of trees and vines creating shade and beauty in defiance of the desert climate. For a few brief centuries, human beings created something that seemed to transcend the normal limitations of nature, geography, and possibility. But remember too the cost of that beauty. The millions of people whose labor and taxes made it possible, the administrative systems that controlled every aspect of their lives, the surveillance networks that monitored their loyalty, and the military forces that crushed any resistance to imperial authority. Paradise was possible, but only through the systematic oppression of almost everyone who helped create it. But their legacy lives on in every government project that promises to create something beautiful through the efficient organization of human resources, in every administrative system that claims to serve the common good while primarily benefiting those in power, and in every moment when we're asked to trust that our individual sacrifices will contribute to collective achievements we may never personally enjoy. The Persian Empire fell. The gardens crumbled, but the questions they raised about power, beauty, and human organization echo through every civilization that has existed since. We still try to build paradise through systematic control, and we still discover that artificial paradise requires more resources than any society can sustain indefinitely. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be as peaceful as those ancient gardens in their brief moment of impossible perfection. And may you wake tomorrow in a world that remembers both the beauty that organized human effort can create, and the price that organized human effort always demands from those who provide the labor, but don't control the systems. The King of Kings is sleeping now, and his gardens have returned to sand. But somewhere in the night, the dream of paradise persists, waiting for the next empire that thinks it can organize beauty into existence and make it last forever. Rest well, knowing that you visited the greatest empire in ancient history and lived to tell the tale. The Persian roads stretch on into tomorrow, carrying messages we're still learning to read from kings whose kingdoms exist now only in memory and museums. The sun sets on every empire, but it rises again each morning on people who still dream of building something better, something more beautiful, something more just than what came before. The Persian Empire's gone, but the human dreams that built it remain, as eternal and as fragile as water flowing uphill toward gardens that bloom in the desert for one perfect moment before returning to the silence of dust and time.